A lot of people don't understand that. They think that only the rich invest. I'm like, no, I got rich because I invested. And so you have to think that same thing.
Is it really hard to beat the market?
It is impossible to predict what you think are going to be the winners in 30 years. It's just so volatile. I'd always wanted just to be rich. And I was like, in order to be rich, I need to make good money, not spend all of it, and then save and invest the difference. When my husband and I were saving 50% of our income, we lived like college students. We lived like we were broke. I ran the FIRE calculation and basically came to the conclusion that by about age 31.
Talk about some practical ways to tackle both debts, like credit card debts and also student loan debts.
Credit card debt, I'm like, look, this stuff grows faster than any investment on the market.
What are we talking about when it comes to like mindset, and what is the importance of mindset when it comes to financial independence?
Money isn't something to be afraid of. You should think and talk about money because it's an important resource.
Is a house really good investment, or like
people are mistaking home ownership for an income returning asset? There's two easy ways where you can literally set and forget an investment.
And they still complain that they can't save when they live paycheck to paycheck.
And usually the two places where I make the biggest suggestions, where I tell people this can lead to the biggest changes, but people aren't always willing to do so. Your and your
Hello and welcome to the Compounding Project podcast, where we talk about taking small steps to become healthy, wealthy, and wise. I'm your host Satish Kachula, and this episode is all about wealth, especially financial independence. Our guest today is Shang Saavedra, who's joining us from Southern California, US. Shang is the founder and CEO of Save My Sense, which is a nationally recognized and award-winning financial coaching business. Shang teaches people the key habits and behaviors needed to become less fearful of money and live the life with joy. She received her bachelor's degree in economics from Harvard University and an MBA from University of Chicago Booth School of Business. She became financially independent by the age of 31 and now lives a work optional life. She's also the author of a brand new book, Wealth is a Mindset, Change Your Mind, Change Your Life. She'll be sharing tools, tips, and strategies for reaching financial independence and living the life that you want to live. With that, Shang, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, I'm going to dive right in. So in your book, you mentioned everybody has a money story. So can you talk to us about your money story?
Yes. I basically immigrated with my parents from Europe to the United States when I was 10 years old. And I think being immigrant parents, my parents were always very aware that we needed to live below our means, be frugal in order to afford life in the US. And so I learned, I think, a couple of really great things from them, that money isn't something to be afraid of. You should think and talk about money because it's an important resource. It's important to work hard. And they also overemphasize education, which is why, they asked me to work really hard to get into a good school. And I think that all gave me a fantastic foundation to set me up for earning my first paycheck after school. And they also helped save up to pay for my college tuition. And that meant that I graduated debt-free and was able to focus on saving and investing right away, which I recognize is a privilege that doesn't happen to most Americans who are college graduates.
Yep. Oh yeah, thanks for sharing the story. So I keep telling on this podcast that the only money advice that I received growing up was just save money. So I was not told what to do with the saved money, but that's the only advice that I received, right? So we'll talk about, you mentioned saving and investing, so which we'll talk about during the later parts of this episode. So when it comes to money lessons, right? What are some of the money lessons that you learned growing up, and also what beliefs? You mentioned you talked about money during your childhood. So how did that impact your whole financial journey?
My parents made it very clear that in order to get ahead in life and live a better life, you need money to do it. And so there was a great emphasis on education because they felt that that was the path for me to have a good income, which I still think largely rings true in the United States. There's a correlation between level of education attainment and income. And then on top of that, I remember when my parents revealed to me that they were able to pay for my college tuition, I did ask. I was like, how is that possible? Because I didn't think we made all that much money at the time. And that's when I'm 17 at this point. My dad shared, well, I invested to get your college tuition. And so they also introduced to me as a teenager that there is this concept of investing, and it's a way to grow your money more quickly than mere saving. And by normalizing all of these topics, they didn't go into a lot of detail. They didn't show me exactly how to, but it made me interested in thinking, okay, this is something that I too can eventually learn how to do. And over time, I was self-taught through reading books and going online and also just figuring things out on my own.
Yeah, it's great to know about investing. It's especially when you're a teenager. That's such a gold mine, right? At least understanding the concept of investing. That's such
Yeah.
an early age, for sure. So let's talk about mindset. So you mentioned like wealth is a mindset in your book, right? So let's talk about mindset. You mentioned scarcity mindset and abundance mindset. What are we talking about when it comes to like mindset, and what is the importance of mindset when it comes to financial independence?
There's a strong correlation between what you believe and tell yourself and how it actually plays out in your behaviors day to day. And there is a lot of research that shows that when people put themselves into a state of scarcity, they're less likely to take the risks necessary to build wealth. So, what do I mean by that? Many people, when they learn that I'm an immigrant, they'll also say, oh, I too am an immigrant. And I think that's why I have scarcity mindset because my parents are frugal and I'm frugal. I'm like, that's actually not true. I don't think all immigrants are scarce because they're frugal. That's not it. Scarcity is actually the avoidance or the fear of taking risks because you want to stay in your comfort zone. You like things just as they are. And so how that translates actually in money is that you don't think your income can grow. You don't think you deserve to go out and negotiate. You don't want to try doing weird things to, grow your business or get more customers. And you're afraid of investing because you think that it's gambling. And that's the mindset that I'm trying to change because I was like, people need to actually look at the real data and see that many of these beliefs are ultimately not true.
Right. So what is abundance mindset? I mean, you talked about scarcity mindset. So what does abundance mindset mean?
Abundance mindset is the embracement of risk. So you understand that you have to take measured amounts of risk in order to see success, especially growth in your life beyond what you see currently.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, that's powerful for sure. So yeah. I know we mentioned about I mentioned about financial independence. So let's talk about like financial independence. So you became financially independent at the age of 31, right? So let's talk about so when did you actually first come to know about financial independence?
Actually, quite late because I'd always wanted just to be rich. And I was like, in order to be rich, I need to make good money, not spend all of it, and then save and invest the difference. The idea of FIRE, financial independence, retire early, was not on my mind. It was not a concept that I knew about. I mostly focused on learning how to save and invest, read books around that. There's a blog that I really liked called Get Rich Slowly that really emphasized being disciplined in just putting money away for investing. I used my company's 401k. I used IRA. I also used taxable brokerage and just controlling lifestyle inflation. I entered into the world of management consulting, which is a career where you can make significant bonuses. And then on top of that, I side hustled as a wedding photographer. By the time that I had met my husband, we then agreed that to prepare for the volatility and the higher cost of becoming parents, let's, while we are child free, learn to live off the lower of our two incomes so that the financial impact of becoming parents wouldn't be so dramatic. And that was when we pared back our spending so much that anyone in the fire community would say that's fire level saving because we're saving 50% of our income. And I guess somebody along the way learned that about us. I wasn't shouting this from the rooftop. I wasn't sharing this with anybody, not really. But somebody, one of my friends kind of like figured it out. He's like, I think you're being really, really frugal. Have you ever read this blog called Mr. Money Mustache? And that's when I read it. I was like, oh, I guess we're kind of like doing that. And I ran the fire calculation and basically came to the conclusion that by about age 31, that was when we had achieved our fire goal.
Okay. Okay. So can you talk about that fire calculation just for people who might not be aware?
Yeah, and it's also in my book. The standard fire calculation is that your net worth is 25 times your living expenses. And because at that time it was just me and my husband, reaching that is a lot easier than now when, we have children.
We'll get back to the episode in just a few seconds. 94% of people who watch this channel haven't subscribed. If you're enjoying this episode, then please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow and brings in even bigger guests, which means more value to you in the future episodes. Now, back to the episode. All right. So let's say you mentioned 25 times of living expenses. So let's say if somebody has like $40,000 of annual expenses, that would be $1 million in net worth.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
And so once they have that, so they are like financially independent. So their portfolio would cover their annual expenses.
Assuming that your net worth, that your assets remain invested, the underlying assumption is that they're still invested in assets that would grow faster than the rate that you're withdrawing, because your withdrawal rate is 4%. You're living off of 4% of the net worth, but maybe your investments might grow 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% a year. And then so the theory is that the growth sustains the underlying $1 million that you have, and you're just living off of the growth coming out of it.
Got it. Yeah, I think it comes from Trinity study, I guess. Yeah, so it's a study that was done probably 30 years ago when they looked at previous stock market, history and data, and then they came up with this number. So that's I'm going to link that in the show notes as well. So I know we are just jumping around, so I just want to have bring to the basics, right? When you talk about like fundamentals. So when it comes to wealth building and financial independence, so what are the key fundamentals that most people would get wrong?
I think that it's not that they get it wrong, it's that it's really hard to commit to it, which is keeping your expenses as flat as possible. Yes, your expenses will go up because there's natural inflation happening all around us. Your rent's going to go up a little bit every year. Your groceries are going to go up a little bit every year. But it is the fact that the people who are aiming for fire, their income might jump a lot. You get promoted, you get bonuses, you get stock payouts, but you don't let that affect your day to day. You take all of that extra and you invest it as aggressively as you can while keeping your lifestyle low. And the reason why that works is two ways. One, you save a lot right now. And if you can keep your lifestyle relatively steady, that also means that you don't need a lot to become independent because you're not aiming for a super high number to support a very lavish lifestyle. And so I joke, I'm like, look, I am probably not the richest financially independent person out there, because I don't live a lavish lifestyle, but like all those people who, travel a ton and have luxury everything, I'm like, they need to keep working to sustain that lifestyle, whereas I don't have to do that.
That's actually incredibly powerful. So I read this book called Millionaire Next Door. I read probably like 8 years ago. And then until then, I had this mindset that people who are like rich and famous or at least like financially independent. I didn't know what financial independence was back then, but I assumed that all these millionaires are spending lavishly, right? Buying luxury clothes and living in fancy houses and also buying yachts and stuff. I thought that was the lifestyle. And then after I read that book, like average millionaires are somebody who drive maybe, let's say, a used car, right? And also
Honda, Toyotas.
Exactly. And it did not add up. And then I read this book again. So for Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And
Great book.
he talks about this wealth is what you don't see, right? So that's a beautiful concept that you just mentioned. So keeping our expenses low, which I believe there's a term called lifestyle inflation. So if you
Avoiding
can look.
lifestyle inflation. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So, avoiding lifestyle inflation, something that people can look at, right? So maybe, so yeah, you mentioned you were debt free, but usually, I mean, yeah, it's not a luxury everybody can have, I would say.
Yeah.
So let's start with students, right? And then we'll start with a student, and then somebody, and then track his lifestyle, and then see how we can like better achieve financial independence. So for somebody who's in the 20s and who just graduated, usually they'll have student loan debts.
Yes.
So now how can they start taking care of finances? So should they first clear all the debt and then start saving and then start investing, or what would be some like ideal approach for this?
Well, let's make sure you work a job that pays. Um, and I think it's less of a problem now. But I've worked with people who are currently in their 40s and 50s who went to college with, I think, very unrealistic expectations of what college does, and they'll take subject matter classes that don't add all that much to their resume, and then they exit college into a job that they probably could have gotten without a college degree. So I'm like, if you're going to take on student loans, then it's the expectation that you should also take a job that justifies the student loans you took on to get that degree. Otherwise, why? Why would you do it? So that's my first scrutiny: is get into a good paying job, a good paying industry, even if it's not the most glamorous or the most fulfilling ideal career you want to be. Because I'm like, now is not the time to dream like that. You can dream later. That's my practical side. Get into a good paying job. Then at first I want you to actually save up an emergency fund. So yes, you have some minimum payments to make on your student loans, but we're not focusing on you becoming completely debt free just yet, because the greatest risk to a beginning college graduate financially is not that you can't get debt free, it's that you may get laid off. You are the lowest in terms of tenure, you have the least amount of experience, and you don't necessarily have a lot of financial cushion to fall back on if, God forbid, you got laid off. So I want everybody to actually start with a starter emergency fund of 3 months of must-have expenses. If you have the luxury of moving back home with your parents, then maybe you don't need to get to 3 months. But for like myself, I was very far away from my parents. I needed to be able to live on my own if I lost income. So 3 months of expenses, save that in a savings account. When you get there, then you can focus on being much more aggressive about paying off your student loans and getting started with investing.
Got it. So in terms of, so now this person has maybe 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up and in an emergency fund. And then he has student loan debts and also credit card debts, right? So credit card debts is also something that, at least I experienced myself until I read these financial books, that I was looking at my friends and then everybody. That's the first time when we actually get a lot of money and then we start splurging it, right? So I'm glad I read some financial books, so I didn't take that decision to buy a luxury car right away, right after I graduated. But and also having an lifestyle inflation. So let's say for somebody who has this student loan debts and also credit card debts, so we have heard about Dave Ramsey's method in terms of like how to tackle debt. So can you talk about some practical ways to tackle both debts, like credit card debts and also student loan debts?
For me, what matters more is the interest rate on your debts. So when I coach people in person, I take all of their debts. I'm like, just tell me the names. How much do you owe? What are the interest rates? And then what I do is I rank them from highest interest rate to lowest. So typically, credit card debts usually have higher interest rates, and then you have student loans, and then everything else. And for credit card debt, I'm like, look, this stuff grows faster than any investment on the market. And so that's what we're going to prioritize. And you're just going to do everything you can to pay that off. And I even say you don't need to have a fully funded emergency fund to pay off credit card debt. I usually get to 1 month must have emergency fund. And then I start paying off credit card debt early, especially when we're over 10% interest rate. Once you get your debts down to 5 to 10% interest rate, then get your emergency fund up to 3 months, and then pay off the debts with 5 to 10% interest rate, ideally ahead of time. Once debts are below 5%, this is where it's usually, well, before COVID, car loans and mortgage loans. Now things are a little bit different. But if you got, one of those magical pre-COVID mortgages, then it actually makes a lot more sense for you to be investing instead of paying off the debt early. Debt freedom is always good. There's nothing wrong with total debt freedom. And I know that that's what Dave Ramsey promotes because partially he had the personality where he would go back into debt. So it's actually psychologically good for him to say, just get completely debt free. But mathematically, it's not always the right choice. And once I have the people who I teach and coach, once their debts are around 5% interest rate or less, I'm like, we're going to balance it. You're going to still make those minimum payments on your car and whatnot, but then all extra money that you used to be putting towards your loans, we're now going to emphasize retirement, like your 401k and your IRAs.
All right. Yeah. So one thing that actually came up when I first read about tackling the credit card debts, I was also looking at like my highest interest rates and then tackling that highest interest rates first. And then so my friends, what they started doing was there is a 0% APR credit card. Like for 1 year you get no interest. And then, so what they would do is like they would transfer. So once they
Balance
hit that
transfer.
one year mark, balance transfer, and then once they hit that 1 year mark, they would go to the next credit card and they would even recommend that. But I felt it was like very risky. So what are your thoughts on this one, like for somebody doing balance transfers?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, you're still using debt to pay off debt, but I do encourage it amongst my clients if I see several months of consistency in them setting aside the money to pay back debt. Because yes, if you can do a balance transfer, it pauses your interest rates. You no longer have, 20, 30% interest rates. You have zero. That's fantastic. Every extra dollar that you put towards that credit card debt is purely paying down a loan. And we need that. We need interest rate relief. But if you're doing that and then you kind of fall back onto your own old habits and you're not consistently paying off debt, you're just kicking the problem of debt down the road. So it depends on where I think the person is psychologically and if you have reached the discipline where the balance transfer works for you and not against you.
Got it. I think that piece was missing, especially like, in my friends group, like we were still having that high lifestyle, but just differing our problem to future state, right? So it's that.
Yeah,
That's
you're like,
definitely
that's for future me to handle, not now.
exactly. So instead of addressing the root cause, we were just applying a band-aid to the situation, right? And then take it forward. So that's good. So I think we tackle a little bit when it comes to debts, right? And also, so let's switch to savings. So one of the main challenges. So I have a post on my Instagram page about financial independence, wealth building, personal finance, and one of the main challenges that they would get is saving, right? So my friends, I mean, they're all in the tech industry, and then they earn each person earns more than $100,000 per year. So they're in the tech industry, and they still complain that they can't save when they live paycheck to paycheck. So I'm sure you must have heard among your clients as well about this problem of living paycheck to paycheck. So what's actually going on there? So how can people come out of that?
I do get to look at people's expenses on a line by line basis so I can break that down. I think if you are making above average income, like 100K and above, you absolutely are capable of saving, but are you letting your environment and the other high earners around you and the influences around you change the way that you think your life should be lived? When my husband and I were saving 50% of our income, we lived like college students. We lived like we were broke. We had the tiniest of apartments in New York City, and it was rent stabilized, not rent control. Rent stabilized meant that the rent can go up and not beyond an unreasonable amount each year. It was not the most comfortable place to be. 420 square feet is all we got. And the kitchen wasn't complete and the bathroom plumbing sucked. Living off of a high income and then saving oftentimes requires to completely ask yourself, what are my priorities? What is it that I physically, psychologically need? And that's where I'm going to put my money. And then what do I not need right now? What can I delay? What can I sacrifice right now for a better future? And I think that's where a lot of people kind of mix it up a little bit, or they're not being honest with themselves. And they're like, oh, I really need a luxury vacation because mental health. I'm like, no, you need a break, but you don't need a luxury vacation. Or I need to eat out all the time because I don't have time to cook. I'm like, no, you need to eat healthy at home because all that eating out is like fried and greasy and not good food for you. And you can do a mix, but I don't think you need to be eating out all the time. Sometimes it takes like half an hour for your food to arrive. It takes half an hour to put together a very easy meal at home. Yeah. So it's like line by line. I go through it line by line. And usually the two places where I make the biggest suggestions, where I tell people this can lead to the biggest changes, but people aren't always willing to do so, your home and your car. Get to a smaller place, so it lowers your housing costs, whether you own or rent, it doesn't matter. The smaller the place, the less it costs. And don't drive a crazy fancy car because for many people, they can probably make do with public transportation and Uber combined. That's what I did for many, many years before we finally moved to a place where it was not realistic to rely on public transportation. And then even so, we got a used car because we didn't need to buy new.
Yeah, that these two are like, the powerful advice when it comes to like housing and transportation. I believe I actually did this 80-20 on my own expenses as well, and then listed out, let's say if I have like 100 expenses, and then 20% of expenses were contributing to 80%, of my total, like, monthly expense, right? So of them, like, housing, food, and transportation, they were the key ones. Like, instead of looking at, let's say, like saving on a coffee, right? I mean, I know there are studies where they say that's also important, but let's so housing, food, and transportation were contributing to a majority of my expenses. So if we just optimize one, or if all areas of these three, then that would like make a ton of difference. So you mentioned used cars and you mentioned like home ownership as well. So can we slightly talk about like when it comes to like home ownership, right? So I'll talk about, like, I'm originally from India. So in India, like home ownership is a big deal. And also when it comes to like marriage, so they would also look at whether this guy, like a girl who owns a house, and that would also, you know uh, get better prospects, for lack of a better word. So we it's also like I believe in the US, it's the first time I heard like it's an American dream to own a house. So can we talk about like the math behind it? So is a house really a good investment, or like what can we do there?
People are mistaking home ownership for an income returning asset. I said, I care about assets that generate income, that make money for me. Your home doesn't always, and it's often not guaranteed, to make income. But the entire real estate industry, the real estate agents, the mortgage lenders, the closing and title agents, the Reno people, the construction people, everybody is incentivized to tell you that your home is an amazing investment. Nobody actually sits down and does the damn math and realize not always. And when I ran the math for the vast majority of my coaching clients, there's a couple of like things that I look for where I say that seems to justify home ownership more. First, you need to stay in a location for a long time. Like we're talking minimum 7 to 10 years of ownership. Two, you need a low mortgage interest rate, which is not the reality at this point. And then three, you also need to be in a place where rent appreciation is faster than the cost of the property taxes and the homeowner's insurance. And then you also need to be aware of the fact that home ownership is not just a mortgage. It's the property taxes. They always go up. The homeowner's insurance, it always goes up. You have to repair every system in the house over the course of 100 years of ownership. People are not prepared for that. Then, at the end of the day, then there's also a question of what are the supply and demand statistics. In India, I can totally see why housing is important because you have a fixed amount of land and a growing population. So the demand is always going to exceed supply. Whereas in the US, we don't have guaranteed population growth depending on how you want to count our population. And we have very steep regulations that make it hard for people to build a lot more. That's probably the only reason why home appreciation has happened, but it's not even across all the country. And I've gotten into real estate situations myself where the home that I owned didn't appreciate all that much. Heck, look at celebrities. A lot of celebrities sell their mansions at losses of millions of dollars, right? And nobody talks about, oh, they made a good buy. No, they never did. They never made a good investment out of it. So I think you just need to be realistic about what is it that you want out of the home. If you want it because it's a good school district and you understand it's actually more of a cost than an investment, yeah, go for home ownership. I think that's the more realistic approach. But if you want it to be a cornerstone of building your wealth, then I'm like, run the math. You probably would make a lot more money renting that home out than being the one to stay in it.
Got it. Yeah, that's powerful advice. I've done my calculation myself. I've read this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, probably 10 years ago.
I love that
and
book.
yeah, and then that's when I first came to know about the concept of assets and liabilities. And always thought, owning a house was actually an asset. Because it was bringing in money. That's what I thought. But yeah, it was just I waited for almost 10 years to get my first house. I recently got a first house, and then I was looking at the math behind like. So I've got a terrible interest rate because of the interest rates right now, and I was
Yeah.
looking at the math as to how much of my mortgage payment was going to principal versus interest.
I know those first years.
Exactly. Like I'm like, oh my god, I don't think I'm living in my house. It's actually I feel like I'm paying
You're just paying
rent
the bank.
exactly, paying the
You're
bank.
paying the bank.
So but I made sure that this was an intentional decision. So I did not buy this house because it's an investment, but I thought, okay, so my wife and I, we are in a situation where we have a baby recently, so we thought, we would just
Congrats.
yeah, thank you. So that was the reason. One of it's
Yeah.
mainly an emotional decision versus a financial decision,
It's
right?
more lifestyle
Exa-
decision and not so much, oh, I bought this home because it's a cornerstone of like my net worth growth or something like that.
Exactly. So that's like we need to be like what you're saying is like we need to be clear when it comes to like home ownership, like what's up, the mindset behind it matters more, right? Okay, so yep. So we talked about home ownership and we talked about debt and savings, and so one question that I often get is when it comes to home ownership and also financial independence is rental properties, real estate, right? So I've seen people like doing either only stock investment or only real estate or doing a combination of both. So what are your thoughts on real estate when it comes to financial independence?
I think it's a great way to build wealth. If you look at the makeup of the portfolios of the billionaires of the world, some of them built it from company ownership, some of them built it from investing like Warren Buffett, and some of them built it from real estate. Most of the Hong Kong billionaires, for example, are real estate magnates. So it's just, they're all different asset classes, right? Running your own business is one asset class, real estate is a different asset class, investments in general, different asset classes. Most investors will tell you you do need to diversify your asset classes because oftentimes real estate will move in a different way than the stock market, although the correlation has gotten closer in recent decades. And it also depends on your style. At the end of the day, you are only as successful as your capability of controlling your emotions around your investments. The less emotional you can be about your investments, the more successful, because the more objective you become. You're like, I see all of my investments as numbers instead of, oh, I feel good about this investment. And in real estate, the real estate investors, like the professional real estate investors I know, they talk about their doors. They're like, I have this many doors, and this is the rent, the vacancy rate, what yada yada. They're talking numbers. They're talking percentage returns, and then also comes down to style. I'm a very lazy person. Like in my ideal situation, I would nap and eat, and that's basically what I would like to do. I don't want to go out and look at a broken light bulb. I don't want to fix a driveway crack or anything like that. So real estate just isn't my style. But there are people who love getting their hands into fixing up a home. And so I do think that your investments also have to reflect your personality and just where your interests are. Because if you're interested in something, you're more likely to be passionate and research it and understand it a lot more than merely saying, oh, I heard somebody tell me that I should do real estate, so I'm going to do real estate without actually thinking, hey, is this the right fit for my investing style?
That's great. I mean, I'm on the same bucket as you as well. I think for me, like real estate is not something that I feel like I would, if I get maybe a $10,000 bonus, I would close my eyes and invest in the stock market versus looking for the next property or
Yes.
yeah, that's how
Yes.
I'm wired. I feel like. So yeah, maybe so yeah, since we're on the topic of investing, so let's talk about your journey. So you mentioned about saving, growing up, like you have that mentality of us being frugal and saving. Like, so when did that investing mindset come to you, and how did that start?
Thankfully, not only did my parents tell me that you need to invest to get ahead, I also happened to stumble upon a series of classes in middle school that actually taught me what stocks were. So I had a very, very early exposure. So to me, it was expected. Like I expected to be investing when I had the chance. And then so I started investing basically practically with my first paycheck. Obviously, I was building up my emergency fund, but I was like, okay, I'm going to sign up for my company's 401k and hopefully even do an IRA or maybe. And even in college, I was around a lot of events that focused on getting women into finance. So I was constantly told, yes, historically, we don't think women belong to finance, but don't let that get to you. You do. You belong in finance, and you should be an investor. So I just loved having that. And like you, I also read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I think Rich Dad, Poor Dad was also my number one most influential book at that time. And then for me, it was just logistically easier to invest in the stock market. Didn't have the capital to do real estate. Not interested in real estate. I also lived in Boston at the time, where you'll need a lot of money to buy a property, and that's how I got started. And thankfully, because in my line of work in management consulting, I did a lot of what's called private equity due diligence, where you literally analyze an entire company and industry. I also learned like what news to look out for and how things affect profitability of companies. And even though I was not allowed to trade individual stocks, that was actually a legal concern of our company. We couldn't trade individual stocks, so that meant I did mutual funds from the start. It also meant that I understood that investing was a long game, that you're not going to get returns necessarily right away. You have to be patient and you have to be diversified in order to be successful.
Okay, so where were you investing money? So you mentioned, so just because of your company, you were not doing any individual stocks, right?
Yeah.
So where were you investing? You mentioned mutual funds. So can we talk about
Yeah.
yeah.
This is not investing advice, making sure that we have that disclaimer. With my 401k, right, they have pre-selected number of funds. Like they'll have large cap, mid cap, small cap, US, international bonds. And literally at that time, because I didn't know any better, but I knew the words, I knew the keywords to search for. I Googled, nowadays you would do ChatGPT. I Googled ideal asset allocation for a 20-year-old. And I saw like, a couple of blogs that said you should do X% this, X% that. So I took those formulas, I kind of averaged it, went back to the list of funds that my 401k offered and more or less tried to match what they said. Then at that time, picking between funds, I had no idea. Nowadays I know you look for the lowest expense ratio, but back then I didn't. So when I was looking at several funds that literally looked identical to me, I was like, I'm just gonna pick the one whose name I like the most. I didn't know any better, so I'm like, this name sounds cool, so I picked that. But I think by virtue of the fact that I was diversified, that I didn't do individual stocks, and that I was ready to hold on to investments for a long time, meant that I was already on track to a good strategy that then as I got older and wiser, I refined down the road.
So yeah, I first came to know about expense ratio probably 5 6 years ago, and I was never paying attention to it. So can you talk about like expense ratio and why it's important when it comes to selecting funds?
Yeah. Well, have you ever noticed how the same apple can cost $2 at one grocery store and then $1 at a different grocery store? That's kind of like expense ratios when it comes to mutual funds. Many mutual funds invest in practically the same thing, but the only difference is how much does it cost you to invest in that fund. And that's the net expense ratio, which is every year they take a percentage of the total amount that you own in this fund and they take it away as a fee. How exactly they take it away, whether they do it as a explicit, transaction or it's kind of more hidden, that's going to depend on the platform that you're investing through. But all else equal, if you are looking at two identical funds, you're going to make a lot more money by going with the one that costs you less because the expense ratios look kind of small. You're like, oh, it's 0.5%, it's 0.3%. What does that matter? It adds up over time. And because people just don't, you're not feeling it because you're not literally handing out, money from your wallet every year. You don't feel it. And that's the psychology that these asset management companies bank on, is that they're kind of banking on your ignorance of how much these fees can cost so that they can literally make stupid money off of you.
Got it. Yeah, I've done the calculations myself, and it blew my mind.
Yes.
Over a 40-year period, those fees would definitely add up. So yeah, I'm going to link some calculations also in the show notes as well. So yeah, so we're talking about this student who actually, let's say, he cleared his credit card debts, and also maybe his student loans are below 5%,
Okay.
and then he has some savings. And the most common challenge when it comes to investing is people are like scared, right? So yeah, I
Yes.
mean, there's a lot of when it comes to like mindset and risk taking, right? What are your thoughts on like how they can get started, right? Some people say,
Yeah.
okay, I don't have money to invest, and then they wait for so much time to actually begin their first step. So can we talk about like how much money do we actually need to start investing, and also like your thoughts on how they can start investing?
That scarcity mindset right there is the fear of the volatility. And I agree. Stock market investing is a lot more volatile than real estate because your housing price doesn't go up and down in wild swings every day, but the stock market does. Why? Because the stock market is busy. It's got thousands of companies to trade and millions of investors all making different decisions day by day. And so I tell most people, look, if you want to get into stock market investing, you have to be prepared for the fact that the first 5 years are very volatile. So don't invest money you need for the next 5 years. Some people want to save money for a wedding. Some people want to save money for a house deposit. Some people want to save money for a new car or their next vacation. You don't invest that money. We don't. We invest money that you're ready to say goodbye to for at least 5 years. But here's the good news. With new technology these days, you can invest for $1. Like you can buy fractional shares of funds, of stocks. You don't need to get to a minimum. Now, some platforms, some brokerages will instill some minimums, but that's more their thing, like how they manage their companies. But you can find a way to invest for as little as $1. You have to, instead of thinking investing is for the rich, you have to think instead, investing is my way to get rich. And I think that's the belief that a lot of people don't understand, that they think that only the rich invest. I'm like, no, I got rich because I invested, and so you have to think that same thing.
That's a powerful shift in mindset for sure. Like, yeah, I love that concept. That will be our maybe the first line of the promo, I guess. Yeah, that I love that. So yeah. So when yeah, so now we establish the foundation that okay, we can even get started with investing with just $1, right? So and the next big question that comes is like, where should I invest my money? I mean, you mentioned like mutual funds, and you also said you googled best asset allocation and stuff. So can is there any easy way, like for somebody to take that first step? Because the
Yeah,
people would get in that thing that is complex, and they would hesitate to take that first step. So what do you
exactly.
recommend? Yeah.
There's two easy ways where you can literally set and forget an investment. If your company offers a 401k, it's very likely that inside the 401k, and again, this is not investing advice, this is just a good place to get started, they have what are called target date funds. These are funds they're designed to change as you get older. So oftentimes a target date fund, you can identify the fund because it will have a year in the name. So it could be like Fidelity Freedom Fund year 2070. And basically, you look for a fund where that year closely matches the year that you think you're going to retire, which let's just assume age 65 for most people. So you get it to as close to age 65 as possible. What these funds do is that they manage it on your behalf so that as you get older and older, the fund shifts more to less volatile holdings like bonds, short-term investments, cash. What they're doing is they're preventing you from being victim of like an '08 recession where like, oh, you invested in all stocks, you retire in 2008 and all your stocks just, dropped 40% in value. A target date fund lowers the risk of that happening. Another way to do it, also thanks to new technology, and you have to realize there's not a single soul in this entire world that can say, I know how to make the most money on the stock market. No one can say that. Why? Because none of us know the future. I mean, I don't think any of us know the future. And to be able to say that you know how to beat the market, you have to know the future. So anybody who makes that claim is lying. We are all guessing at the end of the day. Investing is less so about picking the winner, but giving you the chance of having a broad enough portfolio that will contain the winners while managing your risk. That's why you'll hear most people who are, being honest, say be diversified, because the more investments you have, the more likely you'll have the winners in your portfolio. So we can use what are called robo-advisors, also called automated investing. These are services. They do charge a fee, but that's because they're helping you. They charge a fee and you give them money. You tell them a little bit about yourself, your demographics. Usually they care about your age, how much, your investments, your investing goals for what are you investing for. And also what they care about is your investing style. Like, are you a very risky person? Are you a more safer bet kind of person? And based on some of those inputs, they'll take that and feed it into their software, their algorithm. And then that software, the reason why it's called automated investing is that it will invest kind of, using artificial intelligence into the stock market for you. So again, they'll pick a portfolio for you. You can check on it, whatever. They'll trade for you and you basically pay them a fee for them to do it for you. More or less, using a combination of these two strategies when you're a beginner allows you to see how investing works without ever having to be the person to pick that investment. And I encourage most people, I'm like, over time, learn about what it is that you're being invested in so that you can understand what's going on and then eventually take it over and do it yourself.
Got it. So yeah, so targeted funds. I've seen them mostly in 401k. I don't see them in
Yes.
any individual
Not
brokerage
as
account.
much.
Or yeah. So maybe for a person who just to get started, just to summarize what you said, maybe start with a targeted fund 2050, 2060, depending on when you're going to retire in a 401k account. And then for a brokerage account, maybe you can start with robo advisors. Can you give some robo
Yeah.
advisors, just some,
So, I mean,
get
just talking
started?
about the biggest platforms, Vanguard has their digital advisor, they call it digital advisor. Fidelity calls it Fidelity Go. If you're Charles Schwab, I think it's called Charles Schwab Automated Investing. And they have different levels of service from just complete software based to software based with, human help. But the more human help you introduce to it, the higher your fees get.
Got it. And how about Wealthfront, Betterment, are they still good companies when it comes to robo advising?
I understand that they are also big players in the game. What I don't like about them is they're not as comprehensive in the number of plans they support. So Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab also manage a lot of people's 401ks and IRAs. So you can kind of link all of those together when you're doing robo advising. Whereas when people are using Wealthfront and Betterment, it's usually limited to just a taxable brokerage account, and there isn't as much linkage to your 401k. And I always recommend people to start with the 401ks and IRAs because you get more tax benefits. You save money. You save money by doing a 401k or an IRA over a taxable brokerage.
Yes, yeah. Taxes are huge for sure. So I want to spend some time on individual stocks as well. So the reason being, so I'm a big fan of index funds. All majority of my funds are in like VTSX, I'm a huge
Yeah.
fan of it. And then I've been
Yeah.
recommending my friends for almost a decade now. And I've still seen people who just resist the idea of sticking to the average because, they want to pick stocks and they say, they say that, okay, I can double my money in 3 years. Like, why
I
would I want
know. I
to
know.
stick to like 10% per year? So what do you think? Like, I mean, you mentioned about Spiva report in one of your previous podcast interviews. So can you talk about like individual stock picking and is it really hard to beat the market?
Yeah, even professionals can't do it. I mean, take a guess. What do you think were some of the top companies, like the biggest companies traded on the stock market in like the late 90s and early aughts? What do you
Yeah, we
think?
have. Yeah, I mean Enron. I've seen Enron.
I mean, back then it was like Intel, IBM, and like a bunch of phone companies because that was when smartphones just, people just started getting online onto the internet. So the phone companies were the biggest. Now you're like, I don't know. I never hear about Spectrum these days, whatever. Everyone talks about NVIDIA. So you can see even in the span of 30 years, it is impossible to predict what you think are going to be the winners in 30 years. It's just so volatile. And it is also just true. There are studies out there where people look at portfolios, and on average, an active trader who picks stocks, by and large, does not beat the stock market average. And I can understand because I think there might be a couple of reasons why people start with stock picking. One, their friends talk about it, so you're often more likely to rely on the anecdotal news and results of your friends than a large data set out there. People just don't think rationally like that. Some people also, I'd say, probably like the thrill of gambling, and there is a high correlation between if you like gambling, your personality is also going to match somebody who likes to invest in individual stocks. Like your personality does, feed into your investing style as well. Some people understand that that's just who they are, but then you also have to accept that you're not that exceptional. Like I'm sorry, just the data will say if you're a stock picking investor, the likelihood of you really making it big is just so small that on the average index fund investor usually beats them over a long period.
Yeah, is it like I think in Spiva report you mentioned 85% of active funds can't beat the market, right? Isn't that amazing? Like
90%. It's closer to 90%.
exactly. Like can you imagine like all these active fund managers like they went to big universities and they did MBAs, they studied financial markets, right? And that's their bread and butter, and still they can't beat the market. And what are the chances of average people beating the market
Yeah.
consistently? Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
it's a
yeah,
pain.
yeah.
It's a pain to do that. Like you're spending time, precious time that you could be out napping. Like I'd rather nap. So
For sure, for sure. I'm a huge fan of Warren Buffett, and then yeah, he mentioned in one of his shareholder letters this 2008 bet. Have you heard about that bet?
yeah,
Yeah.
the hedge fund
Okay. Yeah.
manager bet.
Exactly. Like, can you talk for a few minutes
Yeah.
about that bet? I
He
just to understand. Yeah.
I mean, Warren Buffett remains one of the wealthiest and most well known investors in the whole world, and he's also a very big champion of the average investor not doing what he does, which is actually picking companies, but he encourages the average investor to basically just follow the stock market via index funds. In 2008, he made a bet with a hedge fund manager, so a professional investor. He said, hedge fund manager, you can make your pick of your 5 favorite hedge funds. And we're going to track the performance of these 5 hedge funds against index funds. And then whoever wins in terms of performance at the end of 10 years gets $1 million in just personal money. This is not, he wasn't betting, Berkshire Hathaway funds. This hedge fund manager actually gave up about 7 years into the bet. He didn't want to see how bad the bet went until the end. And then, so he forked over $1 million to Warren Buffett. And I think Warren Buffett just donated it all, but he was just making a point that even professional, top of their game investors can get it wrong.
Wow, that example actually blew my mind. And whenever somebody asks me, like, why I do index fund investing, I would just, send that example to them and understand. Like, even Warren Buffett, like, the richest man, one of the richest men in the world, and also he's been reading for almost 80 years. Like, he started investing at age
I know.
11, and he says, I mean, that's the common advice that he keeps saying. It's not just like he said it once. He keeps saying that average individual will be better off buying an index fund and let compounding do its magic. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think, like, yeah, we rest the case for investing. So I want to be respectful of your time, and then we're getting towards the end of the podcast. So would you talk about your book, Wealth is a Mindset? So I've actually, I mean, before I hit record, I told you, like, I read this book in a weekend, and I found this to be a little unique when it comes to this chapter, especially where he talked about the power of brain, and then
Mm-hmm.
like in these three parts of brain, and then how it impacts our decisions. That I found like it to be very unique. I've read so many financial books, but I've never come across that correlation, right? So can you talk a little
Oh,
bit about, like, your book, like
thank
why you
you.
wrote it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the book is basically split into three parts. The first part, I talk about the science of your brain chemistry and the way your childhood is set up and how that impacts your adult life. A little bit different than The Psychology of Money, which is, again, a very fantastic book as well. But here, Morgan Housel kind of wrote it at a broad level, like saying, in general, this is how people think. Whereas I really bring it down to a personal level, saying, well, this is actually what happens in your life. So first I explain this is what's going on with your brain and why you behave a certain way around money. Then I set out and I give a framework called Trigger Action Reward, where I teach people to undo some of these learned behaviors over time so that they can think more abundantly. And then the third part of the book, I get into the personal finance more practical things. How do you pay off debt? Negotiate for more income. Save on your expenses. Invest for the first time and aim for retirement. And the reason why I wrote this book was when I made it public that I didn't know a lot about personal finance and I'm here to help people, I began coaching people one on one to help them get out of debt, save money, invest for the first time. And when I originally approached my coaching, like any personal finance person, I started with a budget. I'm like, okay, tell me how much you're making, how much you're spending, let's track your expenses. And several of my initial batch of clients would just fail to do this. Something so fundamental to personal finance, which is tracking your money, they just wouldn't do it. They wouldn't, meet any of their goals. But I knew they wanted to. And so I was trying to understand why, because these are not stupid people. These are college, masters, PhD graduated people who are earning more than $100,000. And that's when I started asking different questions. I was like, tell me what you're thinking about money right now. Like, what are you telling yourself? Where do you think that came from? Did it come from your parents when you grew up? I started learning about people's childhoods, what their parents did, whether they remember their parents losing money or not on something financial. And also, I ask people currently, I'm like, how are things? I do have a lot of clients dealing with depression, anxiety, mood disorders, ADHD, something like death of a loved one, or a marriage separation or divorce, or infertility, or unemployment. All of these are shocks to our brain system, and unconsciously they also change the way that we think strategically ahead when managing our finances. That's why many of these people had some of these conditions and they were frozen or unable to move past this thing that's happening in their brains. And that's when I finally realized, oh my gosh, Shang, the budget was the wrong place to start. We have to start with the brain. And once I understood that, things got a lot more effective in my coaching. And that's when I'm like, I need to tell this to everybody. And that's why I wrote the book.
Yep. I loved it. I mean, this is the first time, like I said, I've seen a science, like neuroscience and psychology, in a personal finance book, and then I totally loved it. Now, I mean, I always used to start with the budget, but I think this is very unique, also very unique approach to money when it comes to, like, psychology and neuroscience. I love that. I highly recommend people to check out this book. So yeah, we're getting towards the end of the podcast, and there is a last segment that I call hot seat questions. Are you ready for this? So there are three questions that I ask all my guests. The first one is regarding action. So compounding project is all about taking that first step of action for that compounding to start taking its effect. So what small action would you recommend people take right after listening to this episode?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love for everybody to buy my book, but regardless of whether you buy my book or not, I actually tell people don't get overwhelmed with all of the financial advice that we just discussed. Because we went from debt to home ownership to investing. Yada. We talked about a lot of things. Rather, take one goal that you're really, really passionate about, and break that goal into small steps that you feel you could achieve with 90% certainty. 90% certainty. I'll explain in the book why. But pick one goal that you think with 90% certainty you can do it, and go for that goal. Because I want you to feel the amazing confidence and happiness that comes with achieving the first goal.
Got it. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I love that advice. So the second question is regarding books. So I'm a huge fan of books, and compounding project is all about like taking that first step of action and also like continuous learning. So what three books would you recommend in three areas of life? So one book on health, one book on wealth, and one book on wisdom or self help.
On health, I personally really like The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and it's actually a book that I also cite in my own. This one is an investigative journalist that talks about how traumatic brain injuries can affect the way that people think, and then how do people recover from that and build new habits. So it's kind of like part fun science and then part like self-help. So it's one of my favorite books. The next one is wealth. And I think the book that most closely aligns with what I talk about when it comes to controlling your lifestyle and your expenses is, we actually already mentioned it, The Millionaire Next Door. It's an old book. I mean, one of the authors, rest in peace, is no longer with us. But even if $1 million today isn't what it used to be, the principles in the book are still ring true, that maintaining and controlling your lifestyle expenses is a huge reason why most ordinary people reach retirement. Wisdom or self-help? There's so many, because mostly my mind is on parenting right now. But I actually, the parenting book that I like the most is actually a book called Bringing Up Baby, Bebe, Bring Up Baby. So it's an American woman who marries a French husband and moved to France, and had her children there, and she was noting the differences between the French way of bringing up children versus the American way. I think it's just a funny book, and I also think some of the gems in there point out, I think, some of the neuroticism that we have in the American way of bringing up children. Like, I just think sometimes we're a little bit too involved, a little bit too anxious as a society. And I think that book, especially for me as a first-time mom, made me feel a lot more justified in thinking it's okay not to do everything and not, and not have everything go right for you the first time, because it will still be, your kid is still going to be okay.
Got it. I think I have a 2-year-old, and I haven't read any parenting book. I think that sounds very interesting, so I'm gonna add it to my reading list. So, yeah, I'm gonna link all of those books in the show notes. So we have this last one, which is a rapid fire. We just want to know more about you. So it's all about wealth. I think I might know what those answers are based on our conversation, but yeah, I'm gonna give them anyway. So I will give you 2 options. Let me know which comes to your mind. All right. The first one, like stock market or real estate?
Stock market.
All right. Index funds or individual stocks?
Index funds.
Buying or renting a house?
Renting if it's for the one that I'm living in.
All right. Time or money?
Time.
All right. The last one, health or wealth?
Health.
For sure. All right. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. With that, Shang, thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. So how can people learn more about you?
Hey, so I'm Save My Sense. That's my main personality online. So it's Save My Sense on Instagram, on YouTube, and SaveMySense.com. Thanks so much for having me, and I really look forward to connecting with people on any of my platforms.
Great. I'm going to link all of this in the show notes. With that, if you found value in this episode, then please don't forget to subscribe to Compounding Project. Until next time, trust compounding and take action now. Thank you so much for watching or listening. If you enjoyed this episode, then please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. If you like this episode, you might have to check out this episode, which links in with some of the stuff we talked today. Thanks for watching and see you next time.